Hello, my name is Mary Jane Walker, and this is my first interview, although I'm used to being interviewed out in the wild a little bit more than being interviewed sitting here by my computer. And I have a few books that have now become a reality on Amazon. Now, why did I write my first book? Well, look, I have no idea. All I know is that I'm sick and tired of what I see on TV. I don't know what, if I see on TV, if that's correct or not. It's so subjective. And we've seen, like this real dumbing down of the media. And I just found that I went to countries like Pakistan and found that I didn't actually have to wear a scarf when I was in Islamabad. And I thought, my God, I was told that these societies were terrible for women. And okay, I put the scarf on, and when I got there, I found that most people, like they actually spoke 5 languages, and most of them had university education, and most fathers wanted their children to, or their daughters to go to university, and they were being forced by more conservative parts of their society not to. And I thought, wow, why didn't I know that this was actually true? Why didn't I know that by actually going there, that this society completely differed to what I saw on the mainstream media? So I became incredibly shocked at the hospitality and the nice people I met wherever I went. And I thought, well, I want to write about it because I just think that we need to know, people need to know that if you want to find out about something, and it's in this world and it's about other people or it's a new idea, just go there. Just get like instant knowledge by going there. So I, climbed Mont Blanc and did a lot of hiking in New Zealand, and I was only going to write one book, and I'm ending up I will be on my 8th book this year, which sounds a bit radical, but 3 years ago I started on my first book, which was called A Maverick Traveler. And that ended up being like 80,000 words. And what was one book, I thought, my God, it's turned out to be 8 books. So I hiked New Zealand and thought New Zealand was the most beautiful country in the world and that I wouldn't have to go anywhere else. And then lo and behold, I went to Nepal because I wanted to do Mount Everest, well, just the Everest base camp. And then I thought, oh, I'd been around the world before, but hadn't been out of New Zealand for 14 years, because if you live in New Zealand, it takes a lot of effort to, travel around the world, because it's a 25-hour flight to Europe. And if you want to go there, you want to stay there for at least 2 months. It's a 13-hour flight to, parts of the state, San Francisco and New York. So the first book, A Maverick Traveler, really was a history of my travel. I left New Zealand when I was 20 and didn't want to come back. I came back when I was 24, thinking in French. And then, but that took me, I went to Europe because I have a Scottish passport as well as a New Zealand passport. And I just loved it. But then I found that I was in New Zealand again for 10 years. And then I thought, God, I've got to get out. I have to get out and see the world. And that's when I finished off Europe and went to, I was on, so yeah. And so this one book called A Maverick Traveler, this is where I tend to write. And I have in New Zealand, I've got a lovely garden. And so I ended up writing one book, and a year ago I compiled that book. It took a long time, and then I sat down to cut it down, and then I realised that there were more books coming out of it. So that was called A Maverick Traveler, and it's about my roots in New Zealand, and I managed to cut it down, and then I decided, oh my God, there's all of these other books in there. There's a book about all the 55 trails and the 7 or 8 mid-range mountains that I did in New Zealand. And I thought, well, people need to know about New Zealand as well. And then after New Zealand, I also, over the last 3 years I went and did the Pilgrim Way, parts of the Pilgrim Way in Europe, and then started hiking in Scotland, and I did Ben Nevis, Carrauntoohil, and the Westwood Highlands, and walked around the Camino de Santiago, and I kept on walking, and I went to Russia even. And I absolutely love St. Petersburg. It was like the most European city in the world with all the gold and the food. I mean, I actually enjoyed the food in St. Petersburg more than in Paris. Now, that's saying something. And then I decided that, so my next book, so I wrote a book called A Himalayan Way, and that's all about I walked for 6 months in the Himalayas, India and Pakistan, and then I went to Europe and I did the Camino, and then I went to Scotland, and I also went to Russia at some stage, and then I started going to all of the ballets, and St. Petersburg just really, 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 I loved it. And so then I wrote a book called A Pilgrim Way because I couldn't understand the whole history between Jerusalem and Europe and how the Camino Way came about. And so then I wanted to know, well, how did that happen? And so I've got the history of Christianity recorded in my book called A Pilgrim Way. And, we keep having the Crimean War reoccurring. Every 250 years we have another war. And you have to say, well, why do we keep on having the same war? What's behind it? And that was an interesting factor. And then I decided I went to Greenland in the end because I thought, well, I would like to go to Greenland, and why not? It's not far from Iceland. I loved Iceland. I went to Iceland because I wanted to know why Iceland never suffered the economic collapse that the rest of Europe suffered, and New Zealand suffered, and the United States suffered in 2008, and they jailed all of their financial criminals, and yet we did in New Zealand too, but in the States, a lot of them got bailed out. So I just thought, wow. So I just couldn't believe that this race of 330,000 people in Iceland could just have this amazing culture and have this amazing language. So then I went to Greenland, and I've ended up eating some pretty funny things in my life because I've done it. I've just, done a lot, really. So after I went to Greenland, I came back to New Zealand and I thought, well, look, I've got to go to the States. I wanted to go to the States because it was history in the making, them having a black president, and I just couldn't believe that I hadn't been to the United States. So I went to the United States for 4 months. And that book is called A Maverick USA Way. And I started off catching the train around the States, and I landed in Houston, drove up to Texas. I must have hired about 13 cars. And I made my way around and around and around. And I ended up, I went to all the national parks before the snow set in October. So I ended up going to East and West Glacier, the Grand Tetons, Yosemite's, and in Colorado, the Estee National Parks, and I did all of the major cities, and I had basically predicted that Donald Trump was going to win before I left. All my friends in New Zealand were wrong, and I just couldn't get how people in New York had completely deluded themselves and didn't know that that was the fact. And I met many Republicans, and they gave me their reasons why they were actually voting for Donald Trump. And, everyone has their reasons, every country has their reasons. And in the end, I hadn't met any Democrat by election night. So I decided I'll go to a Democratic Party headquarters just to meet a Democrat. They seem very rare. And so my next book is called A Maverick USA Way. And then the book after that I've decided to do is called A Maverick Australian Way. And I've just decided to write these books because I want to write these books. And why not write these books? To me, we need to write books to make a change in the world, because we have seen with the democratization of media, people can just take out a mobile phone and that's the media now. We don't have any camera people anymore. We aren't getting a lot of the information out there anymore. The information is subject to who's behind it, and we don't have impartial investigation, because I do believe that there's two sides to every story and that we need to get these out. So that's my reason behind all my books. So a maverick was a phrase that was termed by my father, and I quite liked the name because I was going to choose another name, but a maverick just seemed to fit me and seemed to fit my opinions, because I just like to get down with the people. So, dealing with writer's block, I don't think I have writer's block. I've never had a problem with writer's block because I always have a lot to say, so I tend to get it out. And I never have writer's block because I live my life, and so my words that get out there are by my living my life. I'm working on my third book at the moment. My first book I've just released on Amazon is called Maverick Traveler, which was the first book that I sat down a year ago to write that turned into 8. My second book that I have up on Amazon is called A Maverick New Zealand Way, and that's the 55 walks I've done in New Zealand during my lifetime, and like I said, 7 or 8 mid-range peaks at between 1,500 metres up to 2,900 metres, and they can be done quite safely, and just other aspects of New Zealand. And then the third book I decided to do was called A Maverick Cuban Way. I've wanted to go to Cuba since 1992, so I spent 3 weeks in Cuba and absolutely loved it. I did hiking in high heels in Havana last Christmas, New Year's, and that is just coming out on Amazon, and I'm going to also put my work out on other online bookstores. And then after that, my next book, fourth book, is called A Maverick USA Way, and that's from an Antipodean perspective, what happens in the States. But I ended up going to Standing Rock, and as I said, I just, met so many people. And I've outlined my other books, and I probably may redo this interview, but it's good just to get some practice anyway. What do I like about being a writer? What I like about being a writer is being able to put your views across in a way that is understandable, human to human, because I'm talking about travel and I'm talking about people, and it's the people I meet along the way. The idea of my most recent book, called A USA Way, was that I wanted to... I've already explained that. But anyway, thank you for listening.